Hello and a very warm welcome back to the garden. Now, with the new season gradually getting underway, I thought it'd be the perfect time to talk about pests and one of the easiest ways to help reduce issues. So I'm going to get straight to the point. The goal with a garden is to turn it into its own thriving, living ecosystem. And you're after a pest-predator balance. The pests being things like cabbage white butterflies and aphids and flea beetles. But the predators being beneficial insects such as hoverflies, parasitic wasps, and one of my favourites, ladybirds. Something that might actually shock you is that in order to have a healthy garden, you actually need some pests. As a permaculturalist, I believe in working in harmony with nature, and that actually a garden is one of the bridges between modern civilization and the natural world. Nature is quite delicate and it's all about lots of different balances, and one small change can actually create quite a large impact. And for our gardens, instead of trying to prevent certain things from entering the garden, which can actually lead to a build-up of issues, for me, it's actually about welcoming a little bit of everything. The way I approach pest management in the garden is actually on a supply and demand basis. So if there are no pests in the garden, there's no demand for the predators to be here, and that reduces their population, which means if an outbreak then happens, you don't have the predators around to try and help you. So for me, in terms of that natural balance, having some pests around to help maintain the populations of the predators is one of the best things I can do. So during the growing season, my approach to pest management is minimal intervention. If I see something, I'll keep a little eye on it and see what happens. More often than not, and you'll be surprised how often things seem to just sort themselves out, especially if it's a few aphids here and there. But if something does feel quite a bit out of balance, and then that momentum is increasing, that's when you can absolutely intervene. So a common example of when something requires intervention is with your brassicas and with cabbage white butterflies. They can often cause a lot of havoc. So what you can do to prevent is to net them. Now, my approach is to not net any of my brassicas, see what happens. The only two brassicas that got cabbage whitified last year were these Swede, which absolutely pulled through, actually just by picking off some of the caterpillars, and also a little bit on the red cabbage. But things like the kale and the purple sprouting broccoli behind me and some of my other brassicas were fine, and it was nice not to net them. So the trick to greatly reduce pest numbers in your garden is actually down to flowers, because a huge majority of the natural beneficial insects in the predators category also happen to be pollinators, and it tends to be their young or their larvae which actually do all the pest control for you. So really it's actually about allowing those adult beneficial insects into your garden through using blooms and flowers, and then giving them a reason to stay. That's by not using chemicals, so there are a few of those pests around, and that's one of the best things you can do to help maintain a strong balance, to help keep your garden healthy and as trouble-free as possible. So I'll give you a couple of examples. Hoverflies, which are excellent pollinators, their larvae actually go after aphids and these small insects called thrips, which also suck sap from stems and leaves but are far less damaging than aphids. And there are some parasitic wasp species that actually target cabbage white butterfly caterpillars, and they're a parasite. So what happens is that they lay their eggs into the caterpillar and their larvae kind of eat their way out. It's very gruesome, but it is effective. Now, it's not going to completely change everything, but for me, how I approach it is every little helps. I know that's definitely trademarked by some supermarket chain, but in terms of the garden, every little bit does help and it does add up. I actually see pests and diseases as quite a useful tool to show me what I'm doing right and perhaps what could be improved in the garden, because all they are really is nature's way of weeding out the weak. Pests and diseases always target the weakest plants. I just wanted to show you a quick example in the polycrop. So this kale plant behind me is covered with greenfly. In fact, it has been all through winter, and we've left them in place to see if they would spread. But they've only stayed on that very single plant. There's plenty of sources all around here where greenfly could take hold of. There's nasturtiums, there's Swiss chard, there's all sorts of other kale and brassicas. But it's a perfect demonstration how pests like to just focus on the weakest of plants. So very often, if you actually see pests concentrated on a single plant where there might be quite a few of a crop, the best way is just to pull it out. I'm now going to quickly rattle through a list of around 8 really good, and they're all edible, herbs, flowers and weeds that are particularly suited for attracting those beneficial predators to the garden. And I'll start with one that I'm right next to here, especially earlier on in the season. These are pak choi flowers, but any brassica flower, for instance. So kale, pak choi, turnips, swede, they all work so well at bringing in lots of pollinators and beneficial insects. Second is coriander. It's known to bolt quite quickly, but instead of pulling out the plant, let it run to seed, i.e. flower. The flowers are so beautiful and delicate, and they are really good at attracting many pollinators. It also looks wonderful, but it requires staking. However, I'd also recommend just to let them run to seed anyway, because I think my favourite thing about coriander is actually the juicy green coriander seeds. They're an absolute delicacy. Next is dandelions. So you might have heard of things like No Mow May to promote dandelions and other wildflowers. Well, dandelions are also very good at attracting ladybirds. So if you have a few dandelions on your path, leave them be to attract some ladybirds. On the theme of ladybirds, another weed is nettles. Totally edible, totally fantastic for all sorts of wildlife, but in particular for ladybird larvae. I've seen some of the best examples of these actually on nettles. So if you have a patch of nettles in your garden, let them grow to be another thing to attract ladybirds to help protect you against aphids and greenfly. Nasturtium. Now this is apparently a decoy plant for cabbage white butterflies, so it can be a companion plant. I haven't seen any examples here in this garden, but I've heard a few people talk about it. I don't know whether it works or not. But the beautiful flowers are quite striking, and it's a great way to attract a lot of interest from passing by traffic of insects in the air, and it's a great way to bring those to your garden. Dill, just like coriander, let it run to seed, and those flowers are actually known to attract insects called lacewings, which are another fantastic, well, their larvae are fantastic at helping to deal and control with aphid populations. Borage is another absolute must. It looks striking, it's full of activity in terms of pollinators, and it's one of the best flowers that you can grow in your garden. Really what I'm trying to say is that you're trying to grow for biodiversity, because it's a biodiversity that's going to help promote that balance. It's not going to all change over 1 year, it's a 2-3 year progression, but it's free, it costs nothing, and it's really effective. And I definitely add borage to that mix. If you watch this channel, you probably know that I'm also going to mention leeks for their flowers, and also onion flowers, chives as well. All of these allium flowers are so good for attracting beneficial insects to the garden. Now, ultimately, any flower which attracts beneficial insects to the garden is going to help you really create that nice pest-predator balance. Really, this natural method of pest control couldn't be simpler. It's about having all sorts of different flowers in and around your garden to attract that biodiversity. And it's kind of, for me, it's at the heart of what really helps make a garden thrive. One pest I haven't spoken about, but I know I'll get some comments, is slugs. So I want to point you to this video, which actually towards the end of it shows you the world's easiest way, it costs you absolutely nothing at all, to really and significantly reduce slug numbers in your garden. And now is the perfect time to do it before the new season properly kicks off.